And we'll kick this off. Good evening, folks. I'm Kathleen Warner, the director of the Vermont Woodlands Association. It's really nice to see you all here tonight for our first Woods Wise webinar with Commissioner Michael Snyder. It's so great to have Michael join us to read through his book and answer our questions. I'm going to let him do a brief introduction, and then I'm going to start reading the foreword of the book before we move into it. So Michael, want to say hello?
Yes, thank you, Kathleen. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining. I'm really happy to be doing this, and thrilled that you all have interest and want to do it as well. It's admittedly an odd setup. I'm looking at a small screen, sitting in a basement room, looking at a small screen. I don't know, I can't see anyone else. And as I said earlier, Kathleen said there's a big number of people registered, and I thought I've never put that number of people to sleep at once before, but we'll see if we can, where we go here tonight. I did want to begin just beyond saying thanks, and I'm really excited to do this. Read from the book and engage with you. That's the whole point of the book, which was, a product of our department, FPR, in partnership with Bondcliff Books. And really proud of that project that came together over a number of years, and thrilled that it's been well received out there. Before we begin the reading and question and answer, I just thought I'd take a minute to give a couple quick updates from the department. This is a department function, and I take the role of commissioner seriously. I'm proud and honored to serve in this role. So it's a good chance to just offer a couple quick things, and I'd be happy to take a couple questions about general department matters, but really do want to focus on celebrating the book and all your interest in it. But a couple of big things. Many of you know we had the benefit of just a fantastic deputy commissioner for the last 4 years, and Sam Lincoln, who was who joined our team and really added value, capacity, perspective, experience, and it was great. Sam has decided to move on to other things and has stepped down. And that leaves a significant void. And I just want folks to know both that Sam is, if you haven't heard, that Sam has moved on. He's going back to work in the woods. We wish him well. I know he'll stay engaged. But we're working on a plan to kind of reset and fill that capacity, particularly with a focus on modernizing and enhancing and supporting the forest economy of Vermont for all the benefits that it provides. So that's one. And the other is that ordinarily we'd be getting out with folks, our partner organizations like VWA and others, and having meetings and get-togethers and updates, and having a few of our own just to provide that kind of communication. And we're not really able to do that as well, except through this virtual environment. And I want folks to know, then maybe hold the date, that on Tuesday, the 15th of December at 2 p.m., we'll be offering a forestry community update where it will be me giving a little bit of a review of last year's legislative session, what came out of it and what went down, and more importantly, a look ahead and a preview of what might be coming in the session ahead, and a few other updates from the department. But then importantly, we'll be going through a bunch of folks from FPR, our wood utilization, marketing and wood energy program manager, Paul Frederick, forest protection manager, Kathy Decker, state lands issues, Nate McKean, private lands, Keith Thompson, our urban and community forestry program manager, Elise Shadler will join, and our watershed forestry lead, Dave Wilcox, will join, giving updates from each of those elements of the department of the forestry division. We'll be pushing that out through a listserv. VWA, I know, will help in getting the link out, but just wanted to give you a heads up that was out there and a chance to come together as a forestry community to give updates. We'll provide those updates from the department and the Division of Forests, but would look to folks with your questions and suggestions, comments, etc. So I just wanted to get a couple of those plugs in. And again, thanks to VWA leadership and members for hosting and organizing this in partnership with us. I'm really excited to dive in. Kathleen, back to you, as you wish.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Well, we are so grateful that you are willing to do this. Not many states have the access that we have to folks like you, and we are very grateful. So this book, if you have not read it, is for sale on the Vermont Woodlands Association website, The Woods Wise, An Exploration of Forests and Ecology and Forestry, sorry. And I'm going to read the foreword for you. Michael would not read this because he isn't going to blow his own horn, but I'm going to do that for him because this really talks about why we have this book. And then I'm going to turn it over to Michael to continue reading. So the foreword is written by Steve Long, who was the past editor of Northern Woodlands magazine. Many of these essays appeared in Northern Woodlands. So nearly 25 years ago, the fledgling Vermont Woodlands magazine was looking for writers. Virginia Barlow and I, founders and editors, paid a visit to the University of Vermont's Extension Forester. While there, in an office down the hall, I met Michael Snyder, a gregarious young research forester who said he had done some writing and was eager to do more. Send me some samples, I said, not knowing what to expect. Within a week or so, a folder arrived in the mail containing 3 of his stories. I read the first one, not bad. I read the second. The guy could write. After the third one, I immediately picked up the phone and gave him an assignment. Mike's first article was published in the winter 1995 issue, and it told of the return of the fisher, chronicling how this relentless predator had been reintroduced to the Northeast's forests to help control a burgeoning population of porcupines. Mike researched the literature, talked to the man who had years ago been in charge of the project, studied the natural history of the 2 animals, and managed to throw in some public policy without compromising the storytelling. Starting with that first article, his work appeared in 4 out of the next 5 issues. We were starting to rely on him. I appreciated the breadth of his forest-based knowledge and that he could write confidently on any number of subjects. But what I really liked was that he was a fine writer. He knew how to tell a story. I have read many articles written by whiz-bang scientists who knew their microns and their molecules, but could bore you to tears telling you about it. By 1998, Mike had taken a new position as the state's Chittenden County Forester, a position that brought him into daily contact with landowners who had all sorts of questions about their woods. The way I remember it, he was telling me about these interactions and how much he loved explaining some fairly basic concepts to the landowners of Vermont's most densely populated county. I asked him if he would consider writing a regular column that could explain these same concepts to a whole bunch of people. His eyes lit up and he quickly got the go-ahead from his boss, the Commissioner of Forest, Parks, and Recreation, who thought it was a great idea. We struggled with a name for the column, and because it would be a question and answer format, we came up with Woods Wise. Why do tree species produce occasional bumper crops of seed? Why are there so many log rules? Why are fir and spruce so conical? Mike's playful take on these subjects was one of the reasons I so enjoyed editing his work. Irreverent, sly, and peppering his columns with groaner puns, he became the wise guy. His first column opened with a quick response to the question, which trees make the best firewood? One might be tempted to say that the best firewood is that which grows fast and is cut, split, and stacked in one's yard by someone else at no cost to oneself. But what fun would that be? The wise guy was off and running. 4 times a year for the next 17 years, Mike entertained readers with his responses to questions about the woods. Like all good writers, he both engages with the reader and provides valuable information. How valuable? Well, much of what I know about forestry, I learned from editing Mike's column. Time passes, things change. Vermont Woodlands expanded its coverage to all of New England and New York, changing its name to Northern Woodlands. Then after 14 years as a county forester, Michael Snyder was recruited to move upstairs, and he accepted the position of Vermont's Commissioner of Forest, Parks, and Recreation in December 2010. Wow, who knew it was 10 years ago? Holy mackerel, you knew that, Mike. To date, he has served 2 governors in this capacity, one from each political party, either of whom could replace him with a favored supporter. That he has remained in place serves as testimony to the exemplary work he has done on behalf of the forests, the landowners, and the people who make a living in the woods. Much of his career has been spent in Vermont, but by no means all of it. He grew up in New Hampshire's Lake Sunapee region and had valuable early work experience in ecosystem science at Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest in the White Mountains. He has always brought his locals' knowledge of New Hampshire's forests and mountains to his columns. I provide this picture of a man appointed by both Democratic and Republican governors, one who knows intimately the backcountry of both Vermont and New Hampshire, to hint at the breadth of knowledge and experience he brings to this work. Over the course of our more than 2 decades of collaboration, I've been pleased to see Mike's development as not just a wise guy, but as one of our wise men. His longtime readers will enjoy seeing this collection of his best columns under one cover. And what about those of you seeking knowledge about the woods and discovering Michael Snyder for the first time? You are in for a rare treat. Stephen Long wrote that. And I did fail to mention, it's such a wonderful tribute, Michael. I did fail to mention that people should put questions in the chat box, or if you're not really comfortable typing a full question in there, you could just put in the chat box that you have a question, and then I will recognize you and you can turn on your mic and answer it. So with that, the show is yours, Michael.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kathleen. And again, thanks, everybody. Settle in. I hope you enjoy. And I'm really eager to share and then hear your questions, thoughts, and engage with you. And we thought, following the foreword, I would begin with the introduction, which is further background on how this all came to be, more from my perspective. So the idea here is that Woods Wise, an exploration of forests and forestry, is a collection of essays written over a long period of time, and it appearing as the column in Northern Woodlands magazine, and then re-edited, revised, modernized, and recompiled for publication assembled for publication in the book. So here I go with the introduction to Woods Wise. I love forests. No, it's actually the woods that I love. Woods are those wonderful places within forests that somehow just seem smaller and closer and more familiar than what the conceptual or academic notion of forests conjures. Don't get me wrong, I am all for concepts and academic notions of forests. My 15-year stint in forest science with the University of Vermont and Yale University was among the most formative and satisfying of my professional life. It was filled with all sorts of discussions and discoveries, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Still, I think there is a very important distinction between these words, forests and woods. We all know what forests are, but I think we all know and feel what woods are. The forest is a place you can measure and study and make determinations about, but the woods is where you engage your senses. The forest intrigues me, the woods welcome me. This book is an expression of my love of the woods and of the pursuit of happy, productive coexistence within them. That's forestry. In this collection of essays, I explore the endless whys and wherefores of the woods and the many varied ways I spend time in the woods. And I mean all of it: hunting, camping, skiing, scientific field work, and perhaps most notably, working as a service forester with forest landowners and teaching forestry to university students. Almost anything about the woods was fair game to explore in the writing, but my focus has been heavy to tree physiology, forest ecology, and silviculture. So these essays explore both the woods and their endless complexities, as well as the practice of forestry and its endless challenges. Some cover both in one, others touch upon them separately. Each of these essays was previously published as the quarterly Woods Wise column in Northern Woodlands magazine, spanning 1998 to 2015. I always saw it as a distinct privilege and a true honor to see one page with my name and writings in every issue of such an outstanding magazine where I was in the company of so many excellent writers and outdoorists. Over the years, my interactions with people in the woods have perhaps been even more important than my interactions with the woods themselves. I have learned so much from and have been inspired and challenged by so many people: the landowners, school kids, college students, friends, relatives, neighbors, foresters, and loggers who asked questions or shared ideas. I even include one buddy's dad who asked me, "Why don't you write more about things people would be interested in?" It turned out to be surprisingly good advice. My goal in writing these essays was to share my own love of the woods with others who were either similarly amorously inclined toward the woods or had the potential to be. That is, I wanted to share it with anyone with even the slightest interest. I wanted them to experience the fascination and the vexations and to see what I saw, heard, wondered, knew, thought, guessed, and hoped about the woods. And I am to do so by first understanding it through their eyes, ears, minds, and experiences, and then crafting sentences that use my own experience and learning to deliver a well-informed and readable portal into better understanding of and connection to the woods. I was bent on answering questions, but also on poking people to want more. My hope was, and still is, that after reading these essays, every last reader would be, yes, a bit more woods wise. But more importantly, I always hoped they'd be even just a bit more connected to their woods. I believe fully that no matter how small that connection, it has a large influence on how people experience that land. I have been very lucky to spend more than 30 years walking in so many woods and learning so much from my companion of the day. All that time, I've been reading about forests and forestry in scientific journals and textbooks and magazines and trade publications and websites and wherever else I could. Color me odd, a real life tree nerd, but I enjoyed all of it. Is it too much then to also acknowledge that I really enjoyed the craft of turning all that learning into short essays that actual people might enjoy reading? A column would typically be born while wandering the woods, usually with a question or observation from someone whose woods they were. Why is only one kind of tree growing in this really shaded area? What are the roots doing under all this snow? Why indeed are paper birch so white and why not others? We might kick it around and speculate, or maybe even make a pronouncement of fact here or there. Invariably, it would lead to me asking around and peeking into my trusty forest ecology by Spur and Barnes, or tree physiology by Kramer and Kozlowski, or Smith's The Practice of Silviculture, or the like. Often I'd mention one of these woods wisdom-seeking queries in periodic conversations with my editor, Steve Long, when we kicked around column ideas. We called it blabbing, but those phone calls were amazing for me. Through his keen questions and hearty laughter, he guided me into a place all writers would love to find themselves: curious, energized, and confident that I could write 750 words that even I would enjoy reading. Before hanging up, we'd agree to a deadline that I would almost never meet, but somehow each of these essays would indeed get written. I'd sit at my big pine table, the one I ate most meals at as a kid, with scribbled notes on sheets of reused paper, shuffling them around until I could make piles of notes on any element of the answer to the question at hand. Then I'd try to rearrange those piles of notes, the elements, into a story worth sticking with. When something clicked and I could see where to go with it, I would start typing those elements into the computer and off I'd write. Enjoyable as it was on balance, it had its challenges. 750 words. That's nothing. I can hardly tell you what time it is in that 750 words. Most of my first drafts clocked in at 2,000 to 3,000 words. That's a lot of self-editing to get to the word count that Steve would accept. It's always seemed like sculpture to me, where you just have to get rid of all the stuff that doesn't look like the town Civil War hero or whatever. In this case, just delete all the words that aren't helpful or interesting. And oh, by the way, write it for people who know very little of the subject and in a way that will not irritate the many readers who know quite a lot. There really isn't much room to ramble or to provide a long wind-up or background information. You've got to get to it and use your words well. Eventually, I'd get it down to a length and would read it backward and forward over and over a few more times to catch typos and worse lurking within, and then I'd send it to Steve. He would promptly reply with suggested edits and comments that always made it much better. When Steve moved on, his successor at Northern Woodlands, Dave Mance, would play this critical role. It is worth noting that every one of these essays begins with a question. My charge was at least to address those questions, if not answer them. Through it all, I always accepted and embraced the liberating and empowering fact that not everything is actually known and understood about the woods. There's a lot of mystery, even magic, I'll say, left in the woods, even after all of the important learning we've all done. And that is a very good thing. After all, in the woods, we can still feel better than all right about things and our connection to the natural world, even if every last concept and fact is not elucidated. In the woods, it is always okay to wonder why. So that's the introduction to the book. Trying to establish a little bit of a background. Kathleen, shall I roll on here into the first column and read that?
Yeah, I think that would be good. I mean, that is going to be the focus, folks. Michael will start with the first essay, and each month we'll read 2, maybe 3, depending on the number of questions we have, and that'll kind of cue up for you where we're going. And again, if you have questions, just put them in the chat box there. But yes, Michael, let's see, what's the first story here? Why are fir and spruce trees so comical? Take it away.
Appropriate too.
Yes,
well, great.
It?
And I'll pause here as the sound and everything is working fine. I assume I haven't heard any, or am I just talking to myself again?
No, you're good. You're great.
Okay. All righty. Great. So
thank you.
Here we go. Why are fir and spruce trees so conical? Ask any young child to draw a Christmas tree, and chances are he'll draw something close to a triangle. If the kid is particularly talented, she'll draw a cone. Indeed, the cone-shaped tree is as traditional as the holiday itself. Sure, there are the Charlie Browns among us who will settle for less than perfect Christmas tree. But most of us look for a fir or spruce with just the right taper, symmetry, and conical form. That conical shape is certainly the norm at most Christmas tree farms, and the short explanation for that is that the tree farmer shears them that way. Of course, there's more to it than that. Even if you are wandering afield in search of a wild Christmas tree far from any shears or knives, there are plenty of classic cone-shaped specimens out there. In winter, these conical evergreens stand out against the more rounded and leafless birches, beech, and maple. Whether your tree came from the Boy Scouts lot, a choose and cut plantation, or from your own back 40, the smart money says its shape is at least somewhat conical, though your spouse might say comical. Like so many of nature's designs, trees, including spruce and fir, take shape according to a system. Their branches don't grow randomly in various directions. Rather, there's an intriguing pattern to this story. It's a story of dominance and control. Look at a spruce or fir tree. At its top is one vertical shoot, the leader. It's usually longer than all the other shoots around it. That's because, appropriately enough, the leader exerts control over all the shoots below it. This mechanism has evolved, presumably, to ensure that the tree's main thrust is upward towards its source of energy, the sun. Almost all trees begin their lives this way. Young seedlings of most species exhibit such straight up form from the get-go. However, while a cone shape is retained in conifers, it is soon lost in most hardwoods as the tree grows and the single central stem gives way to the forking of lateral branches that often grow at least as fast as the leader. In spruce and fir, the main stem or leader outgrows the lateral branches that grow below it, resulting in a conical crown and a well-defined central trunk. The leader exercises its dominance with help from a hormone called auxin in the top bud of the leader, which inhibits the elongation of the shoots below it. They still grow, but not as much as the leader. The pattern goes like this. In any given year, increases in length are greatest at the top of the tree, and these increases diminish downward and inward toward the bottom. The reason the lower branches are longer is that they are older. They've had more years to add growth, but in any given year, they don't grow as much as the upper branches because the leader partially suppresses the branches below. Thus, the tree takes a conical form and maintains it indefinitely, or at least until the leader's dominance is interrupted. This occurs, for example, if an insect destroys the bud at the top of the leader. In such cases, the lateral shoots just below the leader, newly freed from its control, resume growth at their full potential, vying to outpace each other in a race for dominance. The fastest growing of them becomes the new leader, dispatching its hormones to suppress the others. The result is a crooked stem, as seen in so many weevilled white pines. Some ecologists have suggested that a conical form might confer an advantage to trees growing in montane environments by reducing potentially damaging snow loads on the branches. This certainly makes sense considering the winter environment of so many spruce and fir trees. There is an interesting irony to this conical story. Although the dominant leader phenomenon results in the conical shape so sought after in Christmas trees, Christmas tree growers actually try to overcome it by shearing. Without shearing, the tree does take on a nice conical shape, but an unsheared tree is very open. That is, it tends to be airy, not very dense. Shearing, on the other hand, stimulates the opening of the many buds lying dormant along the branches and encourages the shoots within them to elongate. This results in a fuller, more dense tree. May all your Christmas trees be just the way you want them. That's the end of essay number 1.
And I have a question for you, Michael, from Trevor.
Okay.
Could you comment more about the hormone auxin? Is it more effective at the leader? Is it more effective in conifers?
Good question, Trevor. And the whole area of hormones is, in my view, way understudied and under-celebrated, if you will. It's phenomenal how important it is in trees, in most plants, and certainly in trees. Hormones are chemicals that control chemical reactions and processes that stem from those reactions in physiological process. And they're kind of mysterious, but they exert, they're kind of gatekeepers, and in this way control growth and ripening and fruits and all kinds of process that's so fundamental, and yet we really don't hear much about them, and we don't know a whole lot about them. But in this case, the dominance, apical dominance, as it's called, by the apex of the tree, this role of auxin is pretty well elucidated and is exerted at the top, but exists throughout the tree, and is kind of the switching mechanism, and can change by season or with mechanical injury to the tree, as we've seen. And so, there's an awful lot here. In this case of apical dominance expression, it's very well understood. But beyond that, the regulation of growth and control of growth by various hormones is still this largely mysterious kind of part of tree growth, which I allude to in the introduction, that there's a bunch that we don't know. So I'm not sure if I'm really getting at exactly what you want there, Trevor, but it is throughout the tree. It expresses itself at this control point in apical dominance, and is more, I don't know that it's more common in firs or in conifers than in others. It just expresses itself in different ways because of the unique anatomy and physiology of each species.
I have another question from David Mears. Are there methods to avoid the application of pesticides to control pests when growing Christmas trees?
Well, yes, because there were Christmas trees long before there were pesticides. So one part is to accept a little bit of a different look, and more of a natural look that is less than perfect, I suppose you could say. That'd be one. But the more complete answer, David, is what we would refer to as integrated pest management, which is a more holistic approach to maintaining a healthy environment, minimizing alternate hosts for various fungal species, aeration, hand-picking insects, just limiting the opportunity for insects or fungal pathogens to do their thing, because when you have insects eating leaves, needles, or fungi growing on them, no one's going to buy that tree. So I think the answer is yes, you can avoid the use of intensive pest management through which is IPM, intensive pest management through pesticides, instead, and go with this kind of holistic organic approach of integrated pest management, which could include some spot use, but a minimal use, and is intended to avoid. And some growers are able to do it. That said, I will add this. I think it's really important for consumers who drive this, that commercial tree growers might be forced into using pesticides, you might say, because that's what the market is demanding, is something of a perfect looking tree. So I would say it's important for we who consume the trees to make it known that we're good with a little bit of Charlie Brown. I certainly am, because it also involves less of that sort of intensive pest management.
Thank you. No other questions there, Michael? Do you want to move on to the next essay?
Sure, very happy to.
All right.
The second here is what is shade tolerance and why is it so important? And I'm just sort of fascinated to how this plays out there. Among foresters, the concept of shade tolerance it's hard to overstate the importance of this as a concept in forestry. And yet, in my experience, I found that people don't know what that is. And then when you start to talk about it, it becomes endlessly fascinating. So, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to write about it. So here we go. What is shade tolerance and why is it so important? Shade tolerance is the relative capacity of tree species to compete for survival under shaded, which is to say less than optimal conditions. It is a tree trait, a functional adaptation that varies among species. Because it exerts an outsized influence on tree survival and stand growth, shade tolerance is a pillar of silviculture. Foresters everywhere commonly rank tree species on a continuum from very shade intolerant to very shade tolerant. These rankings of relative light requirements are a fundamental precept, a basis for a forester's management decisions about which trees to keep or cut and when. In our region, forest tree growth is often limited more by a lack of light than by a lack of water. So understanding differences in shade tolerance of local tree species and then deftly employing them to grow nice trees is among any forester's very best tricks. To fully enjoy how and why it works, keep in mind that shade tolerance is not the same as shade preference. Make no mistake, green plants prefer light. In fact, they require it. There's no such thing as a shade-loving tree. It's just that certain species can make do with less light. For these species, a bit of shade makes them more competitive than they would be under more light because they can outgrow less shade-tolerant species. They compete better in shade. Shade-tolerant species, such as eastern hemlock and American beech, can scratch out a living on just 1 to 3% of full light. Typically, they have longer crowns because their lower branches stay foliated longer than intolerant species. They grow slowly and live long. By contrast, shade-intolerant species, such as trembling aspen, red pine, may require as much as 60% of full light to remain competitive. Typically, they have shorter, more open crowns and grow in lower stand densities. They tend to mature early, fruit sooner, and die younger. There's also a class of intermediate shade-tolerant species. Yellow birch and white pine, for instance, work the middle ranges of light availability, remaining competitive with 10 to 30% of full light. Many intermediates germinate and establish under the existing forest canopy, where they'll wait until a local disturbance provides new light, at which point they can respond with accelerated growth to fill a gap in the canopy. These are good, helpful generalities, but it is humbling to the forester to realize that shade tolerance is not necessarily always so simple and constant. Shade tolerance definitely varies with age of trees. Eastern white pine is one of many that is known to be significantly more shade tolerant as a seedling than it is as a mature tree. And shade tolerance can vary within species across site types and regional climates. There's also a genetic component. If we dig a little deeper into the science of shade, we see that shade tolerant trees are better than shade intolerance at balancing photosynthesis and respiration under low light levels. Remember, photosynthesis is how plants make food. Respiration is just the opposite. It's how they consume food. The balance or energy budget determines survival. Shade tolerance can capture and use low levels of light to make food without burning it all in the process. It's not so much that they photosynthesize more under low light than shade intolerant species do. Rather, shade tolerants seem to respire less. They don't build solar cells. They don't build solar cells they have no sun for. They're thrifty. Over time, they make more with less. It's slow and steady to win the race. Intolerants, on the other hand, are more the hare than the tortoise in this contest. They take a very different approach to light capture and use. They can photosynthesize and grow rapidly in full light, which enables them to outgrow the shade intolerance in open conditions. But those high photosynthetic rates among intolerants are often offset by similarly lavish rates of respiration. They are programmed to invest heavily in solar technology, as if light was never in short supply. With light aplenty, their investment pays off. Just watch them outgrow their more shade-tolerant neighbors. But under shade, they cannot capture enough light to pay the costs, and they cannot compete. Thus, spendthrifty seedlings of shade-intolerant species languish in low light, whereas frugal seedlings of shade-tolerant species linger and last. Everything you ever wanted to know about shade tolerance right there.
There you go. And that's interesting, Mike. I was just thinking about, we have a hemlock tree cookie that I take to a lot of shows. And it is really a story about the tolerance of that hemlock tree, because it's not that big and it's 300 years old. And, you know, we talk a lot about that. And last year at the farm show, while I was chatting with someone from New Hampshire, he said to me, gosh, if we could all be as patient and tolerant as that hemlock tree, wouldn't it be great? Well, yes, it certainly would. You know, it kind of changed the narrative I have about that hemlock tree cookie, and turned it into something I could think about a little more personally.
It's
We
so
could
true.
all use a little of that patience and tolerance. So
No doubt. And we can all learn lessons from trees. There are plenty there if we just, you know, willing to look at those lessons.
absolutely. So I have another question from Trevor. You
Great.
mentioned forester tricks in shade tolerance. Could you comment more on these tricks? For example, how would it fit into a management plan?
Well, as this basic pillar or precept of understanding different trees, it's really that it's this fundamental if you're going to manage a group of trees, a stand of trees, some woods, a forest, you're presuming it begins with an understanding of the trees, the physical site of the soils, the hydrology, et cetera, and the trees growing there. And their ecological capabilities. Yes, because you want something doesn't mean they're able to do it. And so we call this sylvics. This is the kind of life history of each tree species and its general tendencies, characteristics, its needs, and its abilities. So trees vary in their approach. They've evolved different approaches. And shade tolerance is one of these sylvical characteristics. That is a basic fundamental characteristic of a tree species. And we have to know how white pine compares to white ash or white pine compares to red pine in its sylvical characteristics to apply any kind of management. Because if you don't, then it's not really management. You're managing nothing but a kind of a hopes and dreams and a fantasy. So the trick is to understand how the trees grow and what they're, I use that sense, they don't prefer it, but they can tolerate it. This is a really important concept in forestry. Is people say, oh, they love the shade or that loves the sun. All of them would prefer lots of sun, moist loam with plenty of water. But that doesn't happen out there in the woods. So they have evolved different ways of dealing, and then some are better than others under certain circumstances. So it's a knowledge of those circumstances and the relative preferences, if you will, or abilities, and we apply that in decision-making and management. So that's the trick, is to be able to understand the basics and then say, I've got this group here, well, they're not very shade tolerant, so I'm not gonna be able to grow them if they're under this shade. I might wanna give them a little bit of a break. This happens commonly in regenerated stands where you've got a relatively young growth and you've decided you wanna carry some of that into the future as high quality trees for one reason or another. And in order to do that, you got to recognize that some of them won't make it unless you give them a break and free their crowns to grow openly and have access to sunlight. So those are the tricks. The trick is to understand what you're working with and then apply it judiciously and deftly with your tree marking paint and your chainsaw to kind of tweak the balance in favor of what you're working for within the limits of what the forest is willing and able to do.
Are there other questions, folks? Michael, do you want to take a few general questions?
Sure.
Or,
Oh yeah.
you know,
Yeah. I'd prefer if we could just limit the rotten fruit. That would be great.
Okay. I did have a question by email from Gary Moore, who
Great.
says, our woods are full of hop hornbeam, most of which never gets larger than 8 inches at the base. Is there any use for it other than for firewood? I once read somewhere that it produced the highest number of BTUs of any wood indigenous to Vermont. The birds like the buds. I grew up knowing it as leverwood or ironwood, as it was used for handles for tools and for whiffle trees.
Gary doesn't need me. He's got it. That's a good one. That's all. So we'll start with hophorn beam, eastern hophorn beam, also known as ironwood. I heard old timers when I was a kid in New Hampshire call it leverwood, and so all of those names reflect something about the plant. So hophorn beam, the fruits have a hop-like structure. They look a little bit like hops the way they are born, and those. So that you'll start there. It was mentioned that birds love them. Turkeys, for example, love them. It's a really valuable wildlife species for its fruits in particular. Then we go. So that's kind of the part of the hophorn name, hophorn beam name. Leverwood or ironwood is reflective of the characteristics of the tree, of the wood being so very dense. I always heard this, wondered if it was apocryphal, went and tried it, and ran a saw through some at dusk, and I swear I saw little sparks. It is not made of iron, it's wood, but it's pretty darn tough. And I think it's because of that, it's not really favored. But as Gary mentions, it has astronomically high BTU value. Its heat value is really high. So it is fantastic firewood. And what's great is it doesn't, as he says, it doesn't really get much bigger than, a 6, 8, 10 inch ironwood is pretty big. So, you can block it into stove length and you don't really have to split it because it's stove wood already. It grows in unique habitats. It's not in pure stands across the forest. It tends to be in these dry sites and shallow. You've seen them there, and often in association in different natural communities with kind of a savanna-like appearance with sedges and grasses maybe in the understory. Really unique environments that are really important habitats. As a forester, I never tried to eliminate it. It doesn't seem to be kind of an interfering species. I think it doesn't, provide barriers to regeneration. So I've always kind of worked with it, and it's not a commercial species, but it used to be, as was referenced, as handles for tools. It's so tough. The lever wood is the idea that you could use it as a lever. I think it was used for hubs in wheels, in wagon wheels. Just incredibly dense, hard, durable, but maybe not that easy to work. So it didn't become more of a commercial lumber species. Mention was made of the whiffle trees, right? These with teams of horses. And again, that durable, tough kind of, can really take a beating and doesn't break down with it. I think those all recommend it for those uses. I think in all my years, I've never heard anybody really complain about it. It's all good, even if it's not a particularly valuable commercial species. And this is something of it's a point I always like to make when I was working with landowners. People say, what's this tree worth? Well, what do you mean? What worth in what way? It's got an economic value. It's also got biologic value. It can have aesthetic value, historic value. And I think it's important to take stock of all of those. Ironwood, hophorn beam, leverwood, it may not have a commercial value, but it has many, many other values.
And Dave Wilcox says he grew up calling it hardhack.
Yes. Yep. That's another one for good reason.
Yep. And Al Robertson, I've got a couple of comments here. Hophorn beam makes great handles, and the cabinet maker at Shelburne Farms has on occasion used the wood in their furniture.
Right. That's what it's going to take, is creative people willing to try different things, because the mass market doesn't do that. But the mass market isn't always reflecting what's possible or what's real or valuable out there. It's just sort of the mass approach. I'd also mention, right, this is Astraea is the genus. This is in the birch family. And so its leaves look an awful lot like a birch leaf with the doubly serrate margins. I remember looking at these buds, these little buds, and you've got these striations on them that may separate them from a similar looking bud. You know, it's easily recognizable, that thin papery vertical strips of bark. And again, I just love so many of the places where it shows up in association with other plants and in unique habitats. Much to admire there in the otherwise, you know, lowly ironwood tree.
And Michael, one more comment here, a question from Sabina. What is a whiffle tree?
Oh, that's a great one. Sorry for that. You know, when it comes to horses, I know a lot about, you know, I know the food goes in on which end and which end it comes out, and it kind of goes down there fast. Can I call on Dave Wilcox to, who I know knows more? Can Dave provide an answer to this? The whiffle tree is the.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
It's the wooden piece that converts that's what the horse pulls on, that is hooked to the implement, whether it's a wagon or a log, if you have a single or even a team of horses. So it's the strength that the horse pulls against that is attached to the chain, or the cart, or whatever you're trying to convey.
Thank you, Dave. I knew you'd do that way better than I could. And that's the key, right? Is that it's taking the force of the horse pulling that load.
Exactly. And it's extremely strong.
Thank you. So, Mike, a question from Skip. What's your opinion regarding planting saplings in openings created by logging, windfall, et cetera, with species like white oak, black walnut, black cherry, trying to create a more varied forest with a high dollar and mast value here in West Central Vermont? So Skip is in Sudbury.
Great. I write about this, I think, elsewhere in the book. There's an essay about this. It's planting trees, in this case saplings, in openings in the woods. It's kind of, to me, it's kind of like giving blood. It's just like, it's just good. It's not, you probably ought to plant more than you think you want, because you got to accept some mortality, you're not going to have 100% success. But I love doing this. I've done it for years. I just kind of pull saplings up, dig them up, try to get as much of their root in the native soil that came with it as you can, and plop it in a bucket and take it to, I like a pre-dug hole where the destination is, because then you don't have to waste time digging the hole and worry about drying out the roots of your transplant. But yes, I think interplanting within your woods for any reason, you're mentioning for higher commercial species value or wildlife species, all of those are good. And even if you just want to see some different kind of species, I think it's a great thing. I've done lots of it. I think, you know, I'm starting to wonder about, well, you know, there's with climate change and shifts in species composition over long time periods and vast areas, there's this concept of assisted migration, of kind of moving, trying to build our resilience by helping trees repopulate in more suitable habitats relative to climate change, if you will. And I know I know less and less about this as the years pass and the science continues, but I am aware that might need to be, you might want to take some caution about, you know, where are we putting things? You don't want to be kind of doing like ecological sabotage, but I think native species within their native range, moving them and planting them is generally a really good thing, especially if it's what you want to do. Making new trees in various places, to me, is always good. Especially when you've got an abundance in one place. One thing that I've done is I've gone to places that were to dig up seedlings, saplings, where I knew those seedlings and saplings weren't going to be able to persist. Roadsides where they get mowed. And so you're not taking it from a place I guess I'm thinking of the source of your saplings before you transplant them. And it's good to think about, you don't want to take them from a place where, you'd like to have some trees, but that's what I've focused on, is moving them from a place where, an old landing where we're going to use it again. So those seedlings aren't really going to make it. Pull them up and put them somewhere else where they will have a chance to go 100 or 200 years. And that's a really good thing to do.
Thank you. Here's another hop-horn bean question, actually.
Excellent.
From Steve Feltus. Some of my hop-horn beam is from stump culture. Does removing some stems kill the tree?
So if you've got, these are stump sprouted ironwood hop-horn beam that are growing from a stump and then sprouts. Is that the basic question, Kathleen?
Yeah. Is that right, Steve?
Want to get it right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, I think I'm not sure about something in particular to ironwood, but stump sprouts can become, there's actually a chapter in the book about this, can become really nice trees, specimen trees, can. And in fact, there's some estimates that a sizable proportion of our native forest trees out there were originated as stump sprouts. You see basswood trees all the time, a big old basswood that's gone and a ring of basswood sprouts around it, which is really kind of neat to see. It happens. The issue is when those stump sprouts grow so close together and you have bark against bark, included bark, where they grow together. Those are really weak unions, and they tend to have rot and are structurally unsound, and that leads to difficulties for the future of the tree. But otherwise, if they're able to grow out at a reasonable angle, that's kind of a U shape, and then up, and are free to grow, those trees can and will grow into excellent trees. And when they're 20 inches at breast height, you'll never know that they were a stump sprout. You'd have to get into the former pith of the tree to have any hope of tracing that back.
Thank you. So Mike, back to this planting question from George. When is the best time of year to transplant?
It's great thinking. Tempted to give a wise guy answer, which is the best time was like a few years ago, or whenever you can. But really the serious answer is the best chances are, I think it's fair to say, when the tree is dormant is best. So in the fall, after the leaves dropped, and before bud break, and probably staying away from right around bud break, because it's a virtual hormone storm going on, and I like to avoid interrupting that. But I think other than the sort of bud break time and early shoot growth, you can do it. I prefer to do it during the dormant season. And some people would say, if you're really serious, you can go out and sever the roots, kind of prune the roots in advance after leaf drop in the fall, and then go dig that tree up pre-bud break in the spring. And they've had a chance to kind of spend the winter healing those wounds and of the roots. But I'd say anytime in those shoulder seasons or through the winter, if you can, is best. That said, it's okay and easy to have success throughout the summer. Again, I would just stay away from the late spring, early summer, that period of reorganization and growth. And once they sort of settle in and have stopped their shoot elongation, leaves are fully expanded, you're pretty good to go there. And at that point, I would say, wet, drizzly days, not on hot, windy days, that's all about, evaporative loss and stress on the transplant. So there's a kind of a seasonal time of year piece. Again, dormant season's best. And then within the growing season, I would say it is kind of a weather factor. Do it on damp days, give the tree every chance to be not stressed. And then if you're traveling, don't dump it in the back of the pickup and have the leaves and the needles blowing around. That's desiccating them, and it's going to cut down on your survival rate. So I like to do it on maybe some of the ugliest days during the summer, and it's a good way to spend the time.
Thank you. And Mike, here's a question from Matthew. Can you talk about the land you own in the northern Upper Valley? Are there specific management management practices you're utilizing. Do you perform regular timber harvests? Are you conducting any specific research? Man, lots of questions there.
When I hear the question, can you talk about your own land? My first answer is, how much time do we have?
Right.
Joe, I wish I could take every one of you to this place. It is a really cool piece of land, I have to say. Certain personal pride here, but I'll quickly pivot and say, I like to make a point that this place is really, and I'm going to tell you why it's so interesting, but I want to start with, I didn't make it that way, right? I was smart enough to see it and acquire it because it's unique characteristics, but it's because of so many other things, including the people who owned it, the many generations of folks who owned it, farmed it, sugared it, managed it, well before we came along. So it is it's a unique woodlot in that, for starters, it's in the Northern Connecticut Valley in the town of Guildhall. And it is we think the northernmost occurrence of red oak on the east side of the state. It borders a nature conservancy preserve on Sheridan Mountain that is well known for its population of red oaks and has been conserved for that. And I've taken a great number of wonderful Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine naturalists, ecologists, and foresters on tours out there, and have enjoyed watching them puzzle over the origins of the oak, as well as the oak and white cedar stand that I have. And I've never seen one of those anywhere else. Red oak growing with white cedar. So I think my point here is that the woodlot is not all that big. It's 90 acres, and it's got an incredible diversity of species, of woody plants, that's trees and shrubs, great flowers and ferns as well, and it's relatively healthy. And it had an industrial ownership. It was farm families for a long time, but then it was part of in some industrial holdings, and was spared a fairly heavy liquidation harvest, just prior to my taking ownership. And I'm grateful for the foresters. I'll give a shout out, Dave McMath. Many folks know Dave is a forester with Vermont Land Trust now. He was the last forester in there, and he saw the value of this place, the beauty and the unique ecological values. And he, at some, as I understand it, at some difficulty to himself, he managed to help people resist just clobbering it for its timber value. So it's got a great mix of northern hardwoods, typical classic northern hardwoods, a little bit, a few acres of enriched northern hardwoods in a little bowl.
Oh yeah, look at that.
And it's got just a fantastic mixed wood stand of spruce and fir, and a crazy admixture of hardwood species. And then these unique pockets of like this white cedar red oak place that is just fascinating. So it's got water, it's got topography, it has western, southern, and northern exposure. So it's got all these different kind of places and nooks and crannies. I could go on. I hope that's satisfying it. Oh wait, you asked about management. Yes, I've done a fair amount of work with some other professionals to rehabilitate some eroding old logging roads, skid trails. So rebuilt those, put in some culverts, water bars, etc. There was an old spring that we rehabilitated. And I have done one significant timber harvest a few years ago, winter harvest with a cut to length system, where it was kind of a low grading. I went through about half of the property, and really focused on removing high risk, poor condition trees in favor of really nice ones that were coming along, and applying something of an irregular shelter wood for the foresters among us here. We could geek out a little bit on silviculture, using an expanding gap approach, kind of built off the Femmelschlag model of kind of gaps, creating gaps, and then building on those gaps in concentric rings. So there were some gaps from the previous harvesting, and I've applied what I like to call a Snyder12, which is my version of the German Femmelschlag, of an irregular shelter wood, of expanding gap with crop tree management between the gaps, and producing firewood, pulpwood, saw timber, and generating significant income for the size of the harvest. but leaving behind more than what we took, and really, again, focusing on just the low grade trees and not, so it was heavy to pulp and firewood and just a small amount of saw timber, which really went beyond what I had tallied in my marking. And that's a credit to the logger, Freddie Cunningham, who really found saw logs in trees that I thought only had pulpwood in them. And he had good markets. So I hope that's a good starting answer. Like I said, I could talk all night about this place and really wish we could go on a field trip.
And so, Mike, that is a perfect segue, because Jock suggested that when we can all meet again, you would do a walk in the woods for Vermont Woodlands Association.
I'd love that. I'll just say yes. And okay. I in a previous life, I used to do that. And I have a wooden bowl given to me by the late Putt Blodgett as a thank you for a VWA tour of a town forest that I was managing, that I cherish, and even more now with Putt's passing.
Yeah, well, we will hold you to that when we're able.
You can count on it.
To have events again.
I just hope I can think of something to say when we get out there.
Oh, that is a problem, isn't it? So we are at 8:33. I think probably we are set for an hour. We should try to stick with that time so we don't take advantage of you.
It's okay.
If there are questions we missed, I'll pull those for next time. And I would remind folks, Michael has agreed to do this on a monthly basis. So January 7th is the first Thursday of next year, and we'll be looking at the next 2 or 3 chapters then. So look for that registration, or perhaps the link you have actually works. I think they're set up as recurring links. So save your link. Plan to join us on the 7th of January. If in the meantime you have any questions you want to send to me, I'll be happy to hold them for our next session. And I did put a little note in the chat box there about where you can purchase Michael's book. It is for sale on the Vermont Woodlands website. We are happy to sell that to you. We are also happy to have you as members. So if you are not a member, please look at our website and consider joining. The more members we have, the more good work we can do.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thanks to everyone again. And I really am thrilled and looking forward to the next one already. It's really fun to be able to do it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Michael. And thanks everybody for being here. Lots of kudos in the chat box here, Mike.
Wonderful. Great. Glad to hear it.
All right. We'll see you all next month. And this
stay well, everyone.
This is recorded. We will have it available for the department and on our YouTube.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, all.